You think you've escaped that narcissistic relationship, but what if you're still living in its echo every single day through the smallest of actions? No one tells you this. The unconscious things you do, the way you respond to messages, the way you sit in silence, the way you check the door 3 times before going to sleep, might actually be signs that the old wounds are still running the show from the inside. After leaving a narcissistic relationship, we often focus on getting away from them, but physical distance doesn't mean emotional freedom, because too often the controller is gone, yet what they planted inside you remains: the fear, the hypervigilance, and the survival responses shaped by years of walking on eggshells. In today's video, we're going to take a closer look at 7 subtle behaviors that many survivors of narcissistic emotional abuse still carry unconsciously. These behaviors aren't strange. They make perfect sense when you've lived in an environment where peace depends on predicting someone else's emotions, where you've learned to survive by pleasing a person who never truly cared for you. Maybe you're caring for others so much that you forget yourself. Maybe you're texting constantly because silence feels dangerous. Maybe you sit in silence for hours because you've been conditioned to believe that speaking up leads to pain. And here's what's important. You are not weak for having these responses. You are surviving. These behaviors were protective, born from a past filled with chaos. But if you continue living in them for too long, they turn into a psychological prison. The good news is you can recognize them, unravel them, and heal from them. And that healing journey begins with awareness. If you're on the path to recovery, if you're learning to hear your own voice again, rebuild your self-worth, and reestablish boundaries that were once trampled, subscribe to this channel today. This space was created for you, not with empty advice, but with psychological insight, deep empathy, and lived understanding. Stay with us, because from the very first sign, you may realize, oh my God, this is me. And each following sign won't just help you recognize the damage, it will help you break free from what you once thought was your personality, but is in truth just a trauma response. The healing journey is never easy, but it always begins with one honest moment. The moment you look at yourself and say, I don't want to live like this anymore. And if you've made it this far, if you're reading these words, it means you're ready. Sign 1. You care for others so much that you forget yourself. Take a moment to reflect on a recent day. Did you make someone's coffee just right because you were afraid they'd be unhappy? Did you rearrange your entire schedule to avoid disappointing someone, even though it left you drained? If the answer is yes, you're not alone, and you're not just too kind either. You're reacting to a much deeper fear, the fear of rejection, criticism, abandonment, a fear planted in you by someone who made love feel like a transaction. Caring for others is a beautiful value, but when it costs you your sense of self, it's no longer compassion, it's survival. For many who've been manipulated by a narcissist, pleasing others is not a choice, it becomes mandatory. Because peace in that household depended on reading the narcissist's emotions in advance and managing them before things exploded. You didn't care for that person because you wanted to. You did it because if you didn't, you'd pay the price. The cold shoulder, the outbursts, the look of contempt. So you learned to stay one step ahead. You learned to do everything right. You became the one who fixed everything just to avoid another blow up. The danger is this habit doesn't end when the narcissist leaves. You carry it with you into work, into friendships, into new relationships. You're still the one organizing, smoothing things over, apologizing, as if not doing so would bring disaster. But do you see what's really happening? Every time you sacrifice your needs to excessively care for someone else, you're reinforcing a false message that your worth is measured by how much you please others, that love must be earned through submission. That's not true. It's never been true. Real love never requires you to silence yourself in order to be accepted. You may think you're just trying to avoid misunderstandings, but in truth, you may be stuck in a self-defense pattern shaped by years of anxiety. And the next sign will show you exactly how that plays out. Sign 2, you over-communicate as if trying to prevent a storm. Do you often send long messages trying to explain everything you did, thought, or felt just to avoid misunderstandings? Do you find yourself apologizing first, even when you've done nothing wrong, just to keep the peace? If you've ever been in a relationship with a narcissist, this behavior isn't random. It's a product of a harsh reality you endured for far too long. silence could emotionally destroy you, and not explaining enough could get you punished. Communication in healthy dynamics is a bridge between two souls. But with a narcissist, it becomes a weapon, one they distort, use against you, and twist to make you doubt yourself. You never know when they'll misinterpret, explode, or weaponize your words. So you learn to over-explain, to speak too much, hoping that if I explain enough, they won't get angry. But the heartbreaking truth is, there is no such thing as enough in the eyes of a manipulator. No matter how you speak, your words will be bent to fit the narrative that you are the problem. Over time, you start fearing silence itself. It feels like the calm before the storm, and all you know to do is keep talking, keep texting, keep filling the space so the storm never hits. And worse, even after leaving that toxic relationship, the habit of over-communicating stays with you. You find yourself explaining everything to your friends, your coworkers, your new partner. Even though they never asked, your mind is still stuck in defense mode. You still believe that if you don't explain enough, someone will leave you, get upset, or feel hurt by you. But take a breath and pause. You don't have to convince the world you deserve to exist. You don't need to justify your feelings or choices just because you're afraid someone might misunderstand you. Start asking yourself one powerful question before you speak. Am I speaking to connect or to prevent a reaction? Communication is beautiful when it comes from a desire to be understood and to connect. But when you're speaking out of fear, obsession, or the desperate need to calm someone you've been conditioned to placate, it's no longer communication, it's surrender. The good news is you can reclaim your voice, and this time it won't tremble. Begin with peaceful silence. Sit with your emotions without feeling like you need to be forgiven for simply being yourself. And little by little, you'll relearn how to speak with freedom, with strength, and with truth. And that is when your voice, the one that was silenced for far too long, begins to rise again. Sign 3. You sit in silence for long periods, not because of peace, but because of fear. Have you ever found yourself sitting alone in complete silence for hours, not reading, not speaking, not doing anything, just sitting there quietly as if holding your breath? No one around you may notice, but inside you're bracing yourself to survive. For those who've endured emotional abuse from a narcissist, silence wasn't a choice. It was a survival tactic. You learned not to speak, not to argue, not to express your emotions, because you knew far too well what could happen if you said the wrong thing. In that old home, one word could lead to a cold stare, a string of criticisms, or worse, the soul-crushing punishment of prolonged silence. So you retreated, you became quiet. You lived like a shadow. No noise, no attention, no trouble. At first, that silence was strategy, but over time it became a habit, then a prison. Even when the abuser is long gone, your brain still reacts as if they're right there. You keep your silence not because you want to, but because deep down, you don't believe you're allowed to speak. You start thinking, don't say anything, no one will understand. Or worse, if I speak, something bad will happen. But here's what you need to know. You are safer than you think. You have the right to speak without paying a price. And you have the right to break the silence, not with anger, but with courage. Start small. Have a short conversation with someone you trust. Say something honest, even if it's brief. Say, I don't like that, and let yourself say it without apologizing. And then you'll witness something incredible. No explosion, no punishment, and you'll realize you can stand in the light and not get burned. Silence may have once saved you, but now it's keeping you trapped in a smaller, fearful version of yourself. You no longer need silence to survive. You can breathe, you can speak, you can sing, and the world will not collapse. Sometimes healing begins with just a whisper. I matter. I deserve to be heard. I don't need to hide anymore. And from that moment on, little by little, you begin returning to your real voice. Not to fight anyone, but to finally stand up for yourself. Sign 4. You check the door multiple times, not because you forget, but because you've never truly felt safe. Maybe you're used to checking the door lock several times before bed. Sometimes you even walk back into the house moments after leaving just to make sure the door is locked. To others, it might seem like a small, quirky habit, maybe even caution. But to you, it's not just about checking the door. It's a ritual to stop your mind from spiraling into panic. For those who have experienced emotional abuse from a narcissist, this behavior often stems from a deep internal sense that everything could fall apart at any moment. In that kind of relationship, you lived in a state of constant unpredictability. They were cheerful one moment and furious the next, often for no clear reason. You had no control. And so your brain searched for something, anything, to hold on to for a sense of stability. That's when it clung to what you could control: the door, the lock, the lights, the smallest details in your home. Checking the door stopped being about security. It became a way to send a message to yourself. I've done everything I can. I did my part. Maybe now nothing bad will happen today. But here's the truth. No matter how many times you check the door, you cannot control the behavior of the person who hurt you. And even after they're gone, the anxiety stays, as if the past could still walk right back in and knock. You're not broken. You're not paranoid. You're someone who learned how to survive in an unsafe world, and you did what you had to do. But today, you can begin telling yourself a new truth. You're somewhere else now. You're not being controlled. You don't need to live in constant alert anymore. Try locking the door just once and gently whisper to yourself, "This is enough." Then place your hand on your heart, take a deep breath, and remind yourself. Safety now comes from within, not from checking the door, but from the stability you're rebuilding day by day. You can relearn how to trust not others, but yourself. Because true safety doesn't come from a locked door. It comes from knowing I survived and now I'm finally living again with a healed heart and an inner world no longer under siege. Sign 5, you mimic the behavior of the person who hurt you without even realizing it. Have you ever noticed yourself speaking in a cold tone, using sarcasm, or trying to control someone's emotions even when you didn't mean to? Have you ever caught yourself reacting just like the narcissist who manipulated you in situations where you never wanted to become that kind of person? If that realization made your heart sink, pause. This isn't a condemnation, it's a wake-up call filled with compassion. When you've lived too long with a narcissist, you don't just learn to endure them. You learn to survive their emotional chaos. And one of the ways you survive is by becoming a little like them, at least on the outside. Psychology calls this mirroring, a defense mechanism in toxic environments where you unconsciously imitate the tone, behavior, and emotional patterns of the person in power. It's your brain's way of blending in, not drawing attention, or worse, avoiding harm. In your world back then, expressing your true self could get you hurt. But if you resembled them, even just a little, you were safer. You were no longer an easy target. And so over time, you started to lose sight of who you really were. The kind, warm, empathetic, gentle you slowly got buried under a protective shell you built to survive. And the heartbreaking part, that shell didn't disappear when the relationship ended. You may still find yourself acting in ways you once hated with your new partner, with friends, at work, not because you want to, but because your brain learned that being like them was safer. But now, you don't need that shell anymore. You don't need to be hardened to survive. You can return to who you are without fear. Recognizing that you've been repeating the behavior of someone who hurt you isn't failure. It's the first step toward awakening. Because once you notice it, you get to choose again. You can choose softness instead of sarcasm, understanding instead of control, connection instead of domination. You don't have to become someone else to be loved. You once became a distorted version of yourself just to feel safe, but today you have the right to come home to yourself and be free. Sign 6, you clean obsessively because it's the only way you feel in control of something. Have you ever found it impossible to relax when your space isn't spotless? Do you scrub the counters, rearrange your bookshelves, or vacuum over and over? Not because it's dirty, but because something inside you feels chaotic. And cleaning is the only way you know how to cope. If you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, this will feel familiar. From the outside, you look tidy and organized, but on the inside, you're trying to rebuild a sense of control in a world that once made you feel powerless. When you live with someone whose emotions constantly shift, when you're forced to predict their outbursts, when you're made to feel never good enough, you start believing you're the only one responsible for keeping things in order, at least in your physical surroundings. Cleaning is no longer just a task. It becomes a ritual to soothe your anxiety. Each time you wipe a surface, it feels like you're scrubbing away a bit of fear, judgment, or the constant sense of being evaluated. You don't clean because it brings you joy. You clean because you're afraid of being criticized, seen as careless, or that if you miss even one thing, some disaster might unfold. This habit becomes deeply ingrained. Even after the narcissist is gone, you still wipe the stove 3 times a day, line up the dishes with military precision, and feel guilty if you rest in a room that isn't perfect. But the truth is this: you don't need to clean the entire world to be lovable. You don't need to control every detail to feel worthy. And true peace doesn't come from polished surfaces. It comes from an inner space that has learned to embrace itself, even when life feels a little messy. Cleaning may have once been how you coped with chaos, but now you can relearn how to live with imperfection and still feel safe. Let a few things be unfinished. Sit down, take a deep breath, and gently say to yourself, I'm okay. I don't need everything to be perfect just to rest. Outer cleanliness can't make up for inner cracks. What you really need isn't a flawless floor. It's compassion for yourself. You deserve a home that's not just clean, but a space where your heart feels accepted, even on your messiest days. Sign 7, you feel startled and anxious when someone knocks because your body still thinks danger is outside. A knock on the door, an unexpected sound, a shadow passing by the window. These little things can send your heart racing, your body tensing up, and your mind spinning in fear you can't even name. Your rational mind may say it's just the delivery guy, but your nervous system reacts as if something terrible is about to happen. If you've lived in an environment where peace could be shattered at any moment by unprovoked anger, icy criticism, or threatening silence, this reaction makes sense. You're not weak. You've lived on high alert for so long that your body hasn't been told, you're safe now. That knock isn't dangerous, but it used to be the beginning of something that hurt you. Psychologists call this hyper-vigilance, a trauma response where your brain constantly scans for threats even when none are present. And the painful truth is, many survivors leave toxic relationships, but bring with them a nervous system that's still conditioned to fear. But here's the good news. You can teach your body that it's safe now. You don't have to endure those startles. You can gently place your hand over your heart and say to yourself, it's just a knock, no one's here to hurt me. Through small practices like mindfulness, deep breathing, meditation, or trauma-informed therapy, you can begin to calm your nervous system, like comforting a child who once had every reason to be afraid. You're no longer living in someone else's shadow. You're here in the light of your own presence. And you deserve to live in a world where a knock at the door is simply an invitation, not a warning of old pain. You are coming alive. You are coming back. And you are not alone. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep walking this journey with us, where every video is a stepping stone toward healing, a quiet light in the darkness, and a gentle reminder, and now you can lay them down so you can finally live, not just exist. Every behavior you had was once a way to survive. Instead, see yourself through the eyes of compassion, and remember, don't try to fix yourself as if you are a problem. And now, as you read these words and listen to this video, you've already taken the first step toward healing. It's not proof that something's wrong with you, it's proof that you survived. That you once had to abandon parts of yourself just to get through the day. If you recognize yourself in any of these signs, let this be clear.